Welcome to another quiet journey into the forgotten corners of human history. As you settle into rest, let your mind drift across oceans and centuries to a vast and ancient land, China. Not the China of neon skylines or bustling markets, but the China of dust, dynasty, and dreamlike endurance. Tonight, we follow the long shadow of stone, the Great Wall, a structure so immense it coils across mountains like a sleeping dragon. But this is not a story of triumph. This is a story of those who built it, and those who ruled from behind silken curtains. You won't find fearless heroes or stirring victories here. What you will find, silence, sweat, and a slow rhythm of endurance. Etched into the bones of laborers, into the whispers of emperors, and into the mystery of sealed tombs. So lie back, close your eyes, and breathe slowly. Tonight, we walk the long, winding, and quietly tragic path of those who lived, labored, and vanished. Behind the stones of the Great Wall of China, this is the longest and largest series of fortifications ever built. Its construction required an estimated 200 million work hours, and its purpose was to keep out invaders, or more accurately, to obstruct their passage and make their advance costly in lives and time. In this series, we bring you stories from all across ancient China, from the mighty emperors to the common people. Today we'll talk about how ordinary people lived, worked, and died building the Great Wall of China. It is difficult to imagine just how large and imposing the Great Wall must have appeared to those who first saw it. Imagine yourself barely awake, shivering in the early chill. The morning air bites through your thin linen tunic. The sun hasn't yet crested the hills, but the overseer's voice has. Sharp, repetitive, and final. You are one of thousands. Not by choice. You were taken from your village, perhaps as punishment, perhaps as duty, perhaps for reasons you will never fully understand. All you know now is stone, earth, rope, and pain. The Great Wall, as you see it today, is only the echo of centuries. It was built in segments, over dynasties, across kingdoms. But the foundation was laid not in stone, but in suffering, especially during the Qin dynasty, where forced labor built wall after wall, stretching like scars over the northern frontiers. The sun is relentless. By noon, your back is slick with sweat, your hands cracked and raw from hauling bricks and tamping earth. Each stone weighs like silence. The food is scarce. A small bowl of millet, sometimes dried vegetables, sometimes nothing. When you pause, if you pause, you feel the breeze. Dry and cold, carries the scent of dust and something else. A lingering sharpness, the scent of fear. Do you know what happens if you collapse? There are no second chances here. No doctors. No mourning. Many died where they stood or fell, and they were not carried back. Some say they were buried in the wall itself. Others say they were simply left. Either way, their names were not recorded. There are punishments, not the kind shouted about in legends, but slow ones. Being made to carry water further, to dig deeper trenches, or to sleep exposed to wind and frost. The nights are long. There is no fire. Only the quiet rustling of straw and the occasional cough from a fellow laborer, too weak to rise. You dream of home. But home feels further than the wall stretches. You forget the names of seasons. Only the rhythm remains. Lift, tamp, stack, and lift again. This was not a brief project. The Great Wall in various forms took centuries. Some dynasties added to it, Others let it crumble, but always it was rebuilt by hands like yours, hands that no one remembered. And yet, as you gaze across the wall you've helped raise, there is a strange stillness. A view over endless hills. For a moment it seems peaceful. Then you return to your task, stone by stone, day by day, until your body gives way and someone else takes your place. But these walls needed maintenance, and over the centuries, the Chinese had developed a solution. During the Han Dynasty, the government began to organize civilian garrisons along the wall. These garrisons consisted of local peasants who would take up arms when the wall was threatened and then return to their fields when the danger had passed. The idea was that these peasant soldiers would be better able to defend the wall because they knew the terrain and could draw on the resources of the local population. However, this system proved to be unsustainable, and the garrisons were eventually replaced by professional soldiers. Nevertheless, the Han Dynasty did introduce some innovations in the construction and maintenance of the wall. They built more watchtowers and signal stations to give early warning of an attack. And they also developed new technologies to make the wall more defensible. One of the most important innovations was the use of a type of arrow called a pot shot, which could be fired from a special device called a repeating crossbow. The pot shot was a large, heavy arrow that could be loaded with explosives and used to great effect against attacking forces. Another innovation was the use of a type of brick called a sun-baked brick, which was made by baking them in the sun rather than firing them in a kiln. This type of brick was cheaper and easier to make than traditional bricks, but it was also less durable. Despite these innovations, the maintenance of the wall continued to be a difficult and dangerous task. The soldiers who were responsible for guarding the wall often had to endure long periods of boredom, punctuated by sudden moments of intense violence. They were constantly at risk of being attacked by nomadic horsemen from the north, and they had to be prepared to fight at a moment's notice. Life on the wall was not only difficult and dangerous, but also incredibly lonely. The soldiers were stationed on isolated towers and battlements, often hundreds of miles from the nearest city. They were cut off from the rest of society and had little contact with anyone other than their fellow soldiers. This led to a sense of isolation and disconnection from the rest of the world. Moreover, the soldiers were not allowed to have family or loved ones join them on the wall, so they were forced to spend long periods of time alone without any company. This lack of human connection took a toll on their mental health, and many soldiers began to suffer from depression and other psychological problems. Despite the hardships and dangers, life on the wall was also an opportunity for adventure and excitement. Many soldiers came from rural areas and had never seen the world beyond their villages. The Great Wall gave them a chance to travel and experience different cultures and landscapes. They saw parts of China that few others had ever seen, and they had the chance to meet people from all walks of life. Many soldiers also found camaraderie and brotherhood among their fellow soldiers. They shared a common purpose and a common set of challenges, and they had to rely on each other for support and assistance. The bonds they formed on the wall lasted long after their service was over. Overall, life on the wall was a unique and challenging experience. The soldiers who lived there were faced with incredible hardships and dangers, but they also had the opportunity to see the world, to meet new people, and to form lifelong bonds of friendship. The Great Wall of China is a testament to the dedication and sacrifice of these soldiers who stood guard on the frontier of Chinese civilization. As we mentioned before, the construction and maintenance of the Great Wall of China was a massive undertaking that required a huge workforce. It's estimated that over the centuries, millions of people worked on the wall, either as soldiers or as laborers. The majority of these workers were conscripted peasants who were taken from their homes and forced to work on the wall for a set period of time. They were typically given basic tools and minimal instruction, and were expected to work long hours in harsh conditions. The working conditions on the Great Wall were extremely difficult. Workers were often required to carry heavy loads, dig trenches, and mix mortars under the hot sun. They were also at risk of injury or death from collapsing structures or falling debris. Despite the danger, workers were expected to complete their tasks quickly and efficiently. If they fell behind schedule, they risked severe punishment, including torture or execution. In addition to the physical demands, workers were also subject to the whims of their overseers, who often treated them with cruelty and disrespect. Over time, the sheer scale and seemingly endless nature of the wall began to take a toll on the workers' mental health. Many became depressed and demoralized, feeling as though they were trapped in a hopeless and meaningless task. Despite the hardships, the workers pressed on, driven by the promise of food and shelter, as well as the threat of punishment. Their hard work and sacrifice played a vital role in the construction and maintenance of one of the world's most iconic structures. Now that you know about the workers, let's focus on the overseers. As you might expect, supervising the construction and maintenance of such a massive structure required a dedicated and highly organized group of individuals. Overseers were responsible for ensuring that the wall was built and repaired efficiently and effectively. They were also in charge of maintaining order among the workers and punishing those who did not meet their quotas or followed the rules. To be an overseer on the Great Wall of China was a position of great responsibility and power. These individuals were typically appointed by the government and were expected to be loyal and obedient. They were given considerable authority to manage the workforce and enforce the laws and regulations governing the construction and repair of the wall. Overseers were responsible for overseeing the distribution of materials and supplies to the workers and making sure that they had the resources they needed to do their jobs. They were also in charge of keeping track of the progress of the work and reporting it to their superiors. The overseers were also responsible for maintaining order among the workers and punishing those who broke the rules or did not meet their quotas. They had the power to inflict punishments ranging from beatings to exile or even death. As such, overseers were expected to be firm and uncompromising in their authority. They had to be able to maintain discipline and ensure that the workers stayed on task despite the dangerous and difficult conditions. In addition to their administrative and disciplinary duties, overseers were also responsible for ensuring the safety of the workers as much as possible. They were tasked with inspecting the structures and equipment to make sure they were safe and up to code. They also had to be prepared to respond to emergencies such as collapses or attacks from enemy forces. Life as an overseer on the Great Wall of China was a challenging and thankless job. They were often overworked and underpaid and were constantly under the scrutiny of their superiors. They were also responsible for the safety and well-being of the workers, many of whom were subjected to brutal working conditions and harsh punishments. Despite the challenges, the overseers played a vital role in the construction and maintenance of one of the world's most iconic structures, and their efforts ensured that the Great Wall of China stood as a testament to the power and ingenuity of the Chinese Empire. We hope you learned something new about the Great Wall of China. We're always looking for ways to improve our videos, and your feedback helps us do that. Let us know what you thought about this episode and what you'd like to see in the next one. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. This is the story of the first emperor of China. While nameless men toiled under the sun and stone, one name echoed above them all: Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Across China, there were hundreds of lords. Their armies fought for land. Their banners were a patchwork quilt of colors and symbols, but one color stood out above all others: the color of blood. As many as 100,000 men died every year in the wars between the states of China. By the middle of the 3rd century BCE, one man had conquered all of them. That man's name was Qin Shi Huang. While others might have ruled over China, he was the first to be emperor of China. He came from a small state called Qin. It was just one of 7, but he wanted more than a kingdom. He wanted an empire. So he formed alliances, then broke them. He waged war, then forged peace. Every inch of the way, he built roads. No matter the size or location of the state, every ruler answered to him. For long, all of China did, except for one. The king had been given the title of the first emperor. But before that, he had been known as a tyrant. And tyrants don't conquer without a cost. At least 200 different states became part of his empire, but they all looked the same. Uniformity was the order of the day. Currency, weights and measures, even writing systems were made the same across the empire. Each state was allowed one official script, one type of coin, one way of sealing a treaty, and this extended to even the spoken language, which was slowly altered to sound the same everywhere. But in order to bring everyone together, he had to break them apart. Tens of thousands of books were burned, mostly those that recorded the history of the various states. Scholars were buried alive with their books. People who knew how to read and write, whose job it was to copy texts, they were killed. Some say as many as 400 scholars died in the first 2 years of his reign. And as the empire grew, so did his paranoia. He distrusted thought itself. Ideas were dangerous. If you controlled ideas, you controlled people. So he went to war against them. This was the beginning of the end. Obsessed with power and with avoiding death, Qin Shi Huang sent envoys across oceans to find the elixir of life. When none could return with a cure, he tried everything himself. He drank potions of mercury and jade powder. He surrounded himself with alchemists and mystics, all of whom promised what none could deliver. But nothing mattered more to him than his tomb. There are a few things that terrified the ancient Chinese, but the afterlife was not one of them. They believed the journey of life ended at the river of no return. After that, your soul went to one of 10 courts of hell where it was judged. Then you were reborn. For Qin Shi Huang, this was not good enough. He wanted to be more than an emperor in life. He wanted to be a god. In death, he planned a mausoleum to rival the heavens themselves. Rivers of mercury, mountains of bronze, palaces of gold, trees bearing precious jewels. The walls were lined with figures of terracotta, some real, some fake. They were made to protect him in his final journey. It took 700 years to build the Great Wall. 8,000 men worked full-time to build it. But the emperor's tomb was finished in just 37 years. It was huge. 46 acres under the ground, twice the size of the Forbidden City. The centerpiece was the emperor's tomb, shaped like a giant chariot. Surrounding it were replicas of the imperial palace and his own home. In the center of his palace was a life-size version of himself. These figures were not just decorative. They had real organs, real bones, and the palace was filled with booby traps. In his tomb, Qin Shi Huang was never alone. There were servants, acrobats, musicians, poets, prostitutes, even chariots and cavalry. And guarding them all were the terracotta army. More than 8,000 soldiers were made to guard the emperor's tomb. All life-sized, each one uniquely crafted. Each face was carved differently. Each stance was carefully chosen. No two warriors are alike. Even the horses were hand-carved. The emperor's terracotta army is considered one of the greatest achievements of world history. But it wasn't just the emperor's tomb that was impressive. It was all the tombs leading up to it. He wanted to rule even in death. His entire empire was laid out before him. Rivers of mercury flowed into miniature lakes. Mountains of bronze scraped the sky. Jade cabbages sparkled like jewels. All of this so he could rest in peace. Of course, he never saw it completed. He died during one of his travels, possibly poisoned by the very elixirs meant to prolong his life. His death was kept secret for weeks while his attendants feigned illness. The real reason for his absence was hidden. It was placed in a cart of rotting fish to hide the smell. People these days have refrigerators, but back then, if you were rich, you hired someone to keep your food fresh. For poor people, meat would go bad after a day or two. Rich people, it would last for weeks. When word of his death finally reached the capital, there was unrest. Officials panicked, while the court was thrown into chaos. Deputized. But Qin Shi Huang's empire survived. It fractured into several kingdoms, but the idea of China remained. And though Qin Shi Huang is remembered as a ruthless dictator, his empire laid the groundwork for 2,000 years of Chinese culture. The man who could not face mortality has become immortal only in stone. Thank you for watching. Imagine walking across farmland in the year 1974, and the sound your shovel makes changes from thud to hollow. You dig a little deeper and it's not soil you're hitting, but roof tiles. And then just below that, a face. Not a skeleton, but a face staring up at you. Stern, silent, unblinking. It's the start of an incredible discovery, one that would captivate the world. Thousands of these silent sentinels were found buried in rows beneath the earth. The terracotta army, an ancient army frozen in time. Each warrior, horse and chariot frozen in their silent vigil. Some are armed with spears and bows. Some are kneeling, as if taking a final rest before one last battle. They were buried with their emperor, the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, over 2,000 years ago. His tomb is the biggest, grandest, most awe-inspiring of all the discoveries at the site, but it has never been fully opened. Ancient texts tell of a place filled with traps, pressure-triggered crossbows, and rivers of mercury, an early form of quicksilver, meant to poison any intruders. Modern scans of the ground suggest the mercury may still be there, shimmering in the dark, a liquid mirror to the dead man's heart. Why bury an army? Surround a grave with such deadly defenses. Perhaps he feared enemies beyond death, an army to protect him in the afterlife. Or perhaps he hoped to command them there, to take the lead once more. The warriors are all life-sized. We don't know how many there are. The central area has already been excavated, but there could still be more in the outer areas of the tomb complex, more than 8,000 figures. Each face is different, no two alike. They weren't mass-produced. While some parts of the figures were made in molds, eyes, eyebrows, even lips were added by hand, a final flourish to make each warrior unique. A reminder that even in death the emperor demanded individuality, but also control. Every detail, every brushstroke was done under his watchful eye. The discovery of the terracotta army is one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. Yet the emperor's main burial chamber remains sealed. There's a simple reason why. Respect, perhaps, or caution, or fear, all three. The ground where he lies is still his, undisturbed, silent. There is something about the stillness of this place that's humbling. These warriors have stood guard for over 2,000 years. They've seen empires rise and fall around them. EVA watched as new dynasties took the lead, and China's Great Wall was built to keep out the Xiongnu, nomadic horse-riding tribes who lived on the edge of Chinese civilization. The wall was designed to keep enemies far away, but here they are, silent, watching, waiting. Maybe the emperor was right to be afraid, and maybe there are dangers in the dark beneath the earth. Or maybe the real danger is in what we find instead. In the haunting sight of all those silent faces staring up at us from the darkness, from the stillness, we have disturbed their sleep. They were meant to be undisturbed, and yet like the emperor whose tomb they guard, we can't help but dig a little deeper, to peer into the darkness and ask, what's down there? What other secrets does the ground keep? We want to know because we're curious, yes, but also because we need to understand. We need to understand the past because it's part of who we are. And sometimes the past doesn't want to be understood. Sometimes it just wants to be left alone. When we find things in the ground, old things, very old things, they change our understanding of the world. They challenge our assumptions, our certainties, our history. But they also change us. When we see those silent faces staring up at us, when we hear the whispers of the wind through the tall grass, when we feel the earth beneath our feet, we are changed by the experience. We are reminded of our own mortality. We are reminded of the passage of time. We are reminded of the importance of the past. So let the ground keep its secrets. Let the silence be respected. Let the past be undisturbed. For in the end, it is all we have left. Long after Qin, emperors would rule not from a brutal stone camp, but from painted corridors of gold and red. They lived in the Forbidden City, a name that conjures mystery. But it was not truly a city. It was a world apart, a walled compound, vast and ceremonial. And if you were lucky, or maybe unlucky enough to be born within, your entire life might play out behind those vermilion walls. Imagine silk brushing against polished tiles. Imagine the scent of sandalwood and ink. You are not a laborer now. You are a member of court, but it is not freedom. Your every movement is watched, your speech is measured. The rituals are endless. Morning greetings, dress codes, bowing angles, paper screens, and whispered suspicions. Eunuchs keep the order. Concubines vie for favor. Scholars recite poetry while soldiers pace the courtyards. Every decision, even who pours the tea, is shaped by invisible rules. Meals are exquisite. Dozens of dishes, porcelain bowls, rare herbs. But the emperor may not touch them first. Food tasters eat. Poison was not uncommon. At night, the lights dim. Musicians pluck notes from the shadows. Outside, the world changes. But inside, the rhythms remain the same. Time in the Forbidden City is circular. Dynasties rise and fall. But the gates remain the same until, one day, they don't. This is the story of one of the world's most famous palaces, the Forbidden City. Long after its last emperor fled in a sedan chair, this is the story of the palace he left behind. It started as a vision, a series of concentric squares, each with its own courtyards, halls, and gardens. In the center, a magnificent throne room, the heart of power for all of China, and around it, 9 more squares, each more secluded than the last. Here at the edge, where the mortals could come no further, lived the servants, the laborers, and yes, the eunuchs, the castrated men who kept the peace through force and favor. The Forbidden City had no windows to the outside world. Walls were high, and the guards were fierce. Ordinary people could not enter without permission, and even then they would only see the parts the emperor wanted them to see. The imperial palace was a stage. From the dragon throne, the emperor could survey his domain like a movie set with courtyards for actors to parade in, gardens to stroll and contemplate, halls for banquets and poetry readings. The layout is a puzzle. 980 rooms with 10,000 ways to get from one to the next. Each room has its own purpose and its own secrets. Across the courtyards, the shapes are echoed in miniature. In the gardens, the rocks and trees repeat the lines of the architecture, creating a kind of Chinese poem in stone and foliage. Inside the walls, there was luxury fit for an emperor. Carpets from the west, spices from the south, craftsmen and artists from all over the empire. The best food, the finest clothes, the rarest books, it was a world unto itself. There were even prisons within the Forbidden City. Some say 10,000 died here, victims of the lash and the bow. The punishments were severe. For crimes big and small, you could be put to death, have your rank downgraded, become a slave, or spend your days toiling in the imperial garden. Life in the Forbidden City was strictly ordered. The emperor woke at dawn, greeted by attendants. Then came the ablutions, a ritual bath scented with flowers, and dressing in silks, choosing from robes embroidered with cranes or peonies or clouds. Then perhaps a stroll in the garden, contemplating the rocks and the carefully raked gravel. Then it was time for court. Officials would arrive bearing tribute and news from the provinces. There would be exams for the scholars, promotions and punishments. Once a year, the emperor would review the troops, inspecting their armor, their drills, and their obedience. But mostly, it was about balance. The emperor must be the moral center of the cosmos, so every action had its equal and opposite reaction. Even the slightest disrespect to an official could bring the punishment of death. There were spies everywhere. Whispers traveled like wildfire. Favorite concubine could take a displease and disappear, banished from the kingdom. One wrong move, and you were out, sent away with nothing, sometimes with a noble title and pension, sometimes not. If you were really clever, you might even get a noble title and keep your head. The emperor was a legend, an immortal, almost a god. And yet he too would die. His body would be preserved in a palace of its own, deep in the mountains. Spirit, they said, would live forever. And the Forbidden City went on and on, a microcosm of the universe, a world of its own, until it wasn't. When the last emperor left, a child in a sedan chair, the silence was not peaceful. It was ending. The Forbidden City is empty now, though scholars still debate what caused its decline. It fell apart quickly once the government moved out. Nature reclaimed the courtyards. Vines grew over the roofs. The wood rotted. The fine paintings and silk were stripped away and sold. When the museums came, they found empty rooms and crumbling foundations. Today, we wander where emperors once walked. We look, but we cannot know what it was like. All that remains is the shape of a courtyard, the echo of silk on tile, the ghost of a dragon throne. From stone to silk, from forced marches to whispered court intrigues, the journey of China's past is not linear. It coils like a dragon, fierce, beautiful, and mysterious. You have walked beside laborers whose names were forgotten. You have listened to the heartbeat of an emperor afraid to die. You have stood at the edge of a tomb that may never be opened. And you have sat quietly in a hall where power wore perfume. And now, ... as the rhythm of history slows, ... let your breath soften. Let your body rest. The great wall stretches across the land, but tonight you are still. Sleep well, traveler of time. The past will wait, and the silence will keep its stories, until you're ready to return. Welcome. As you settle in, breathe slowly and deeply. Let your body relax, and allow your mind to drift gently into the past. Tonight we are traveling far from the noise of modern life to a place where wind howls through wooden planks, where the air is thick with salt and smoke, and where life is governed not by comfort but by necessity. This is not the Viking world of myths and warriors, of dragons and longships cutting across seas with glory. No, this is the quieter story of fishers. Exiles, buried secrets, and smoky halls. The rhythm of this history is slow, repetitive, and deeply human. Let us begin in a cold, northern fishing village, long before the stories were written down. Vikings 101. A day in the life. Hello friends, welcome to my history channel. Today we're going to look at what a day in the life of a Viking was like. So let's get started. The first thing to remember about Vikings is that they were normal people just like us. They had jobs, families, and hobbies. And while they were also known as fierce fighters and raiders, most of them were actually farmers or traders. In fact, during their raids, Vikings often brought along a priest or a religious figure to ensure that any prisoners they took were baptized into Christianity. That being said, the life of a Viking warrior was still pretty intense. So, let's imagine what such a person's day would be like. So picture this. You're waking up before the sun even thinks about rising. You live in a narrow longhouse that's darkened by smoke from the fire pit in the middle. There's no glass in the windows, just some kind of hide covering that flutters in the icy wind. The floor is damp with the moisture of the night before, and the smell of old fish hangs heavy in the air. Outside, the sea is calling you like it always does. You pull on your woolen clothing, still damp from the day before, because there's no time to dry things properly here. You chew on a piece of dried bread, maybe dipping it in some weak ale, but it doesn't really taste like anything. There's not much time for breakfast. It's just enough to keep you upright until you can catch some fish. The boat is small and open and made of pine. You push out into the gray waves with your companions. Your hands, already rough from years of work, grow numb in the biting cold. There are no gloves here, just rope, salt, and wind. You row for hours, watching the coastline fade behind you. The waves aren't gentle today, and the spray stings your face. One man in the boat vomits quietly over the side without making a fuss. No one else speaks. When one of you falls silent, the others don't seem to notice. You're too busy fighting the elements and keeping the boat on course. After a while, you drop your fishing lines into the water and then unroll the nets. You wait patiently, not in peace, but in cold. The sky is empty, just like the endless stretch of sea around you. You wonder where the seagulls have gone? Maybe they know something you don't. Hours pass, and your arms begin to ache with the effort of hauling in the nets. But there's no school telling you to take a break. You catch herring, maybe cod if you're lucky. The boat begins to fill slowly. Finally, with aching arms and a body stiffened by the cold, you turn home. When you return, you don't celebrate having caught something. You just start gutting and salting the fish. Your hands work, even though they're stiff. You need to get this done before your arms seize up entirely. The smell of the fish clings to your hands. It's a smell you know well. A smell that means food, but it also means hard work. Once the fish is ready, you take it home, and your mother adds it to the other fish you've caught over the past few days. She uses every part of the fish. Nothing goes to waste. The smell of cooking fish permeates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your dreams. Later, you might share a fish stew with your family around a peat fire. You eat quickly, not because you don't appreciate the food, but because you need your strength back. You sleep even faster. Tomorrow is the same, and the day after. Remember, this isn't a story of war cries and conquest. It's a story of repetition and survival. If you want to hear more about daily life in Viking villages, comment below. We can talk about how they built their houses, their ships, or weapons, how they farmed or traded, how they lived when they weren't fighting. And if you want to learn more about the Vikings, click on that subscribe button to join the community. We'll bring you new videos about the Vikings and other historical topics every week. We'll see you next time. Till then, keep learning. He wasn't a fisherman, but he was born into that same world of law, exile, and unforgiving cold. He grew up in Norway, but soon he would be forced to find his home elsewhere. His story is an epic tale of survival, exploration, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. This is the story of Eric the Red. Our journey begins in the rugged and windswept landscapes of 9th century Norway. During this time, Norway was a realm of fierce warriors and tight-knit clans. But even in such a society, our hero stood out. His saga tells of a life marked by violence and strife from his earliest days. Eric's father, Thorvald, was a member of the infamous Blood Axe clan, known for their participation in the Danish king's raids across Europe. However, their violent reputation would become their downfall when they crossed the wrong king. One fateful day, Thorvald found himself entangled in a deadly dispute with a fellow clansman, Astrid. During a heated argument, the discussion escalated into a physical altercation, and tragically, Astrid lost his life at Thorvald's hands. Faced with the consequences of his actions, Thorvald realized that Norway would no longer be a safe haven for him, and so he decided to flee with his wife and young son Eric in search of refuge. Their journey took them north to the volcanic island of Iceland, which was initially settled by Norwegian and Gaelic colonists around the year 874. While Iceland was far from a familiar place, I offered a chance at a new life. For the first time, Thorvald had to confront the weight of his past and seek forgiveness for his crime. Before settling down, he decided to make amends by embarking on a pilgrimage to the sacred site of Thingvellir, located in the heart of Iceland's Golden Circle. It was here that Thorvald poured his heart out, begging for mercy and offering gifts to the gods. At long last, his pleas were answered, and he was granted the opportunity to start anew in Iceland. Thorvald wasted no time in laying down roots, establishing a farm in a picturesque valley called Ericstadia. Here he hoped to raise his son Eric to be a worthy young man, instilling in him the values of courage, honor, and respect for the land. But it seems destiny had other plans for the younger Eric. Despite his father's best efforts, Eric grew up wild and untamed, mirroring the rugged Icelandic landscape itself. As a young man, he followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a skilled warrior and leader. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for his hot-headed nature to land him in trouble. In an unfortunate incident, Eric found himself caught in a feud between two powerful Icelandic chieftains, Gellibrand and Holmer. Tensions were high, and when Holmer's men attacked Gellibrand's homestead, Eric found himself in the thick of the battle. As the fighting reached its peak, one of Helmer's men confronted Eric directly. Now, although history doesn't provide details about the ensuing fight, we know that it ended tragically with the opponent lying dead at the feet of the young Eric. In those days, Iceland operated under a legal system known as the Old Icelandic Commonwealth. When a blood feud erupted, a thing or assembly of elders would determine guilt or innocence. In this case, the thing convened at the spot where the fatal blow was struck, and heard the testimonies of witnesses and those involved. In the end, the verdict was against Eric. Too many. It seemed as though he had caused the death intentionally, and for that, he would pay a heavy price. Fearing for his safety, Eric fled to the relative safety of a nearby farm. But his troubles were far from over when his father Torvald attempted to intervene on his behalf. He too was accused of wrongdoing. The elders ruled that he must offer compensation to the family of the deceased. Unable to meet the demands, Torvald found himself exiled from Iceland, stripped of his rights and possessions. With their livelihood gone and their lives in danger, Thorold and his family had no choice but to sail away. Once again, leaving behind the only home they had known for years. They journeyed to the Faroe Islands, a cluster of volcanic islands midway between Iceland and Scotland. The family's saga paints a picture of hardship and displacement, a fate that befell many of their Norwegian and Gaelic kin. In fact, the saga explicitly states that 3 generations of Eric's ancestors had been banished before him. Exile was a grim reality for these early Norsemen, often serving as the punishment for serious offenses, or the only escape from blood feuds that threatened to tear apart their communities. Eric, now just a teenager, might have felt the full force of that legacy. Yet within him burned the spirit of adventure and exploration. Sailing had always been part of his life, and now it became his ticket to survival. With his family sailing away from the troubles of Iceland, Eric knew he had a decision to make. Should he join them in exile or stay in Iceland, he chose to stay. With the support of his mother, he bought a farm near his birthplace and started to build a new life. He even found love and married a woman named Thorgard, with whom he had 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. For a while, it seemed as though Eric's life might follow a more peaceful path. That is, until a series of unfortunate events cast him once again into the maelstrom of violence and bloodshed. The tranquility of Eric's life was shattered when he discovered that one of his neighbors, a man named Gome, had appropriated some of his land, causing a rift between them. Tensions escalated, and one evening, as both men were gathered at a communal party in the village, tempers flared. Words were exchanged, insults were thrown, and soon the gathering turned into a chaotic brawl. Amidst the chaos, Gome met his demise, adding another tragic loss to Eric's life. When the dust settled and the townspeople came to their senses, they turned to Eric, blaming him for the death of Gome. Once again, Eric found himself standing before a thing, charged with murder. As the elders deliberated, they recognized the severity of the situation. If they acquitted Eric, the risk of a bloody feud loomed large. On the other hand, convicting him could further destabilize the community. They decided to banish him from Iceland for 3 years. For Eric, this meant leaving behind his wife and young children. Unable to bear the thought of being separated from his family, he negotiated a deal with the thing. Instead of the traditional banishment, they agreed to convict him of manslaughter and sentence him to a harsher punishment, 6 years in exile. In the face of such adversity, most would have succumbed to despair, but not Eric. In a remarkable display of resilience, Eric channeled his energy into exploring the vast expanse of the sea. Armed with nothing but his unyielding determination and a sturdy ship, he ventured beyond the familiar shores of Iceland. driven by an insatiable curiosity and the need to survive. One day, his journey led him to an uncharted land of immense beauty and potential. He named it Greenland, hoping to attract settlers to this untouched paradise. Upon his return to Iceland, his descriptions of fertile valleys and endless opportunities captivated the imagination of the people. However, his claims proved too enticing, as the reality of Greenland was far different from Eric's vivid portrayal. Undeterred by the harsh conditions, Eric set out to establish a permanent settlement, but he soon encountered challenges that tested his endurance and resolve. The icy terrain offered little respite, and the constant struggle for survival weighed heavily on the settlers' spirits. Over time, disillusionment set in, leading many to abandon their newfound homes and return to the familiar, albeit challenging landscapes of Scandinavia. However, Eric's adventurous spirit refused to be contained. With a thirst for discovery still burning within him, he turned his sights towards the distant horizon. He is believed to have established settlements in various locations, including the Markland in Vinland, an area that many historians believe is part of North America. Throughout his life, Eric remained a pivotal figure in the Norse sagas, a testament to his enduring legacy. Even after his passing, stories of his daring exploits and the hardships faced by his settlers continued to captivate listeners for generations. These tales serve as a reminder of the indomitable spirit of exploration that drove these early Norsemen to push beyond the known world, forever etching Eric the Red's name in the annals of history. In the heart of Greenland, a small colony carved out of the icy wilderness, amidst towering glaciers and haunting fjords, lived a man who couldn't stay, a man who carried exile with him like a shadow. From the cold shores of Norway to the unforgiving terrain of Greenland, his journey was a relentless pursuit of survival. He was Eric the Red, a legendary Viking who dared to dream beyond the confines of his time. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more historical tales. Thank you for watching. Let the wind quiet now. Let the sea fall away. Imagine instead a hillside, many miles from the coast, where a great burial mound rises from the grass. It is a place called Oseberg, overlooking a valley in the south of Norway. And in the year 1881, a farmer was digging a field when his spade struck something hard. He uncovered a section of wood, then another plank. Before long, he had found an entire boat buried in the ground. He alerted the authorities, and soon a team arrived to excavate the find. When they finally breached the mound, what they saw inside was breathtaking. Inside the burial chamber lay a magnificent ship, beautifully carved with intricate patterns, including one that looks like a mythical creature curling across the wood. The ship was surrounded by offerings, including 2 sleighs or wagons, each carved with strange figures and decorated with a circular pattern that resembled suns, or perhaps eyes staring blindly into eternity. There were also several horses, a dog, and even a mysterious square box filled with small animal bones. These remains were carefully arranged around the hole. They weren't simply dumped into the grave. This was no accident. Everything placed here had been chosen with care. The archaeologists knew they had stumbled upon something special. But they didn't realize just how special until they stepped inside the ship and looked at its cargo. For in the center of the boat, nestled among the offerings, were 2 human skeletons. A team leader immediately identified the older woman's bones as those of a queen. She was placed on a raised platform with her knees bent and hands crossed over her stomach, suggesting she had been a high-status individual. At her feet lay the skeleton of a younger woman, curled up as if sleeping. Her posture indicated that she might have been a servant. But further analysis revealed that she, too, was buried with expensive items, including a bronze cauldron decorated with images of a bird that some say could bring good fortune. Unlike the older woman, the younger woman had been laid to rest on her side. Together, their remains formed a powerful image, perhaps intended to show that even servants were cherished in death. But who were these people? What was their story? And why were they buried together in such an elaborate way? The answer, as is often the case with archaeology, is that we don't know much for certain. Only a few scraps of birch bark survived the millennia, offering tantalizing clues about the language of the time. And although we can translate most of it, it doesn't contain any names. It means we don't know the identities of these individuals. We know nothing of their accomplishments or personalities. All we have are the objects with which they were buried. And through those objects, we can get a sense of their roles, their beliefs, and their relationships. When the ship was discovered, many assumed that the older woman was a queen. Queens, after all, were often buried with servants. But over time, experts began to question this assumption. The younger woman's remains were far too well preserved to be those of a servant, and her position at the feet of the older woman could suggest that she was a close relative, perhaps a daughter. If so, the two women might have been related by blood. But some archaeologists disagree. After all, the younger woman was buried with more valuable items, so maybe she was a close friend or even a lover. This may sound shocking today, but same-sex relationships were common in Scandinavia during the Viking Age. And given the ornate nature of the burial, we can assume that whoever this younger woman was, she was very important. Other burials from this period include a collection of boats and chariots, as well as animal remains. But this grave was unique. Nothing else quite matched its scale and sophistication. And while most ships were made to explore the world, this one was made for the afterlife. Archaeologists knew that much because it wasn't seaworthy. The planks overlapped in a way that would have made it difficult to maneuver, and rather than oars, it had holes for the sleighs. Clearly, it was designed to carry the dead, not the living. If the two women were related, perhaps they were sisters. Maybe they belonged to the same family. Or perhaps they were members of the same religious order. But their relationship may never be known for sure. Even their identities remain a mystery. The grave goods offer some hints, however. Both women were buried with objects associated with Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, death, and war. Freya was one of the most important deities in Norse mythology, and those who followed her were said to have special powers. Priestesses were thought to be able to travel as animals, especially cats, and were believed to have knowledge of healing and witchcraft. Each woman's grave included items linked to this cult. For example, a bronze cauldron, decorated with images of a raven, a boar, and a snake, probably used in rituals to honor the goddess. Also found nearby was a bra or large belt bag, made of linen and decorated with a sun or moon symbol. Such brass were often worn by worshippers and may have helped them transform into animals. So who were they? Were they priestesses? Perhaps, but it's equally possible that they were queens. Some historians argue that the women belonged to a royal family and that the smaller woman was a member of the royal dynasty. After all, both women were buried with symbols of royalty, including a large silver brooch and a gabaluk, a type of high-status cloak pin. Additionally, the older woman's head was placed on a pillow, which was an uncommon practice at the time. According to legend, Freya herself was buried with pillows when she died. So maybe these women were considered divine. Some scholars even speculate that the younger woman may have been buried with the older as a sacrifice. Just as Freya was once forced to bury her necklace with a man named Svafnir, whatever the truth, the site offers us a glimpse into a culture that revered women and viewed them as powerful agents of change. The discovery of these remains forever changed our understanding of the Viking Age. Before their discovery, most people saw Vikings as exclusively pillaging warriors. But the Oseberg burial mound showed us that Scandinavian society was far more complex. Women held positions of power. People believed in magic and the afterlife. And death itself was treated as a ceremony. In fact, the Oseberg ship inspired an entirely new field of archaeology known as the Viking grave. Archaeologists began to investigate hundreds of burial mounds, hoping to uncover similar treasures. Many of them did. And over time, they pieced together an accurate picture of Viking culture. They learned that Vikings viewed death as a transition to another realm, and that they prepared accordingly. Most burials took place on hillsides, sometimes in elaborate mounds. The bodies were placed inside boats, surrounded by precious items, animals, and sometimes even human sacrifices. From there, they were lowered into the ground, often with the intention of sending them on a journey. Sometimes they were sent alone. Other times they were accompanied by those who had loved them in life. As for the Oseberg ship, it's now on display at a museum in Norway. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people visit to marvel at its beauty. And when they do, they see not only a collection of wood and metal, but a portal to another world. A world of myth and magic, of death and rebirth. A world where two women sailed away to meet their fate. Archaeologists are still trying to piece together the mysteries of this burial, New techniques may one day reveal more about the two women, their relationship, and the meaning of their burial. Until then, their story continues to captivate us. Because in the end, they remind us that even in death, love can endure. This has been my channel. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us. And I'll see you next time. From the burial, let us walk now into the home of the living elite. The chieftain's longhouse was long indeed, perhaps 30 meters. Thick wooden beams held up a turf roof. Smoke curled through a hole in the ceiling. Firelight flickered over benches, weapons, and fur cloaks. There were feasts here, roasted meats, thick stews, horn cups of ale. Guests reclined on benches, speaking poetry or planning raids. A bard might sing, a hound might sleep under the table, but comfort was relative. The air was always smoky, the floor often muddy. Fleas and lice were constant companions, and power plays unfolded quietly in the corners, alliances, betrayals, whispers in the firelight. The chieftain ruled not by decree, but through favors, oaths, and reputation. One insult could spark years of blood feud. One lost battle could shatter a dynasty. Children slept beside warriors. Women managed food, cloth, and sometimes strategy. Outside, the weather did not care who you were. The elite lived better, but not easily. Their lives were as shaped by the land and sea as any fishers. This is a history hot tip. Today we are looking at the homes of the elite in pre-industrial societies, where luxury was a matter of degree. We can learn a lot about the past from garbage, archaeology, right? Let's get to it. Houses of the elite were grander than other houses. That much is obvious. Archaeologists studying the great houses of the Maya discovered luxurious apartments with frescoed walls and stone floors above the humble thatched roofs of the commoners. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan and his wife could enjoy heated floors and private latrines, while the rest of the populace relieved themselves into the street. The palaces of kings often boasted multiple stories, something that was uncommon among the general population. As well as more durable materials like brick instead of wood or stone rather than mud. In the Ottoman Empire, multi-story buildings were actually a point of contention between rulers and ruled. After all, when the Ottomans seized Constantinople in 1453, they found it full of beautiful multi-story buildings. The Sultan and his wife could enjoy heated floors and private latrines, while the rest of the populace relieved themselves into the street. The Sultan built many splendid multi-story buildings himself, and when he showed them to his advisors, they complained that such ostentatious architecture was unbecoming of a Muslim ruler. What were they looking at? Well, today we call them townhouses. And even though multi-story buildings were fairly common in cities around the Mediterranean, they were still relatively rare in the Middle East. In fact, many people thought that building vertically was a sin, since it would block the wind and therefore mess up the natural flow of air in the city. It took another 2 centuries for people to accept multi-story buildings as normal. Of course, living conditions for elites varied wildly depending on their time and place. For example, some of the most sumptuous accommodations can be found far from the hustle and bustle of cities. In 8th century AD China, an emperor might live in a beautifully decorated palace, surrounded by courtyards and gardens. During the Tang dynasty, the imperial compound contained over 2,000 rooms and had its own post offices, its warehouses, armories, shops, and even dedicated firefighting brigade. This is all to say nothing of the many imperial tombs, which were filled with enough treasure to outfit armies, not just royalty. Meanwhile, the nomadic Xiongnu to the north lived in tents as they followed their animals across the grasslands. In winter, they would camp alongside rivers to keep warm and hunt. But even these elite nomads couldn't count on safe and comfortable lodgings. The royal court of the Xiongnu consisted of yurts surrounded by felt tents for the queen and other nobles. Their dwellings were larger than those of commoners, but still vulnerable to the cold. Unlike the Chinese, the Xiongnu didn't bother with permanent settlements. When spring arrived, they moved north to follow the migration patterns of the animals they depended upon. A house might signal wealth, but it wasn't the only sign of status. A member of the elite would be recognizable by other markers as well. Perhaps they would travel with a large retinue, or wear expensive fabrics or drive a chariot instead of walking. They may also have been identifiable by what they ate. Elites in pre-industrial societies usually had access to more and higher quality food than the general populace. but how exactly they used that food varied. In the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's wife could enjoy a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, including apples, pears, pomegranates, cucumbers, and eggplants. And because the empire spanned 3 continents, she could feast on exotic delicacies like Indian coconuts and melons, African palm oil, and West Asian almonds. Across the Black Sea, members of the Russian royal family dined on black bread and beef, the highest quality food available. In fact, it was illegal for commoners to eat beef. Meanwhile, the King of Sweden kept a close eye on his weight and carefully selected his foods to stay trim. This elite diet consisted of fish, berries, fruit, porridge, and rye bread. The royal menu changed with the seasons, but one thing remained constant: pickled herring. At least 6 servings per week. Even elite diets were influenced by the challenges of storage. In coastal Peru, before the Spanish arrived, political leaders and members of the elite enjoyed a local delicacy called ají de gallina. This spicy chicken stew included ingredients from across the Andes, including corn, potatoes, squash, peanuts, and chili peppers. But despite its fame, it wasn't very practical to prepare. So elite cooks concocted a way to preserve it for special occasions. After cooking, the portions were dried out and ground into a powder. Then when it was time to serve, the dish was reconstructed from the remains. The chicken would be shredded, the sauce would be rehydrated, and then the meal would be plated with fresh chopped vegetables. Not bad for a Sunday. Even elite cuisine wasn't immune to the vagaries of nature. While the climate might not have been as capricious as it is in the Bay Area, it could still wreak havoc on an empire's food supply. The success of an elite diet relied on trade networks bringing the best food to the palace kitchen. But sometimes those goods wouldn't arrive when expected. Climate change during the 8th century brought an early freeze to northern China, which devastated the harvest and created food shortages across the empire. Tang emperors rationed grain and issued edicts banning certain foods from being wasted. But despite the royals' best efforts, there weren't enough supplies to go around. The situation was so dire that the empress had to rely on her personal stash of stinky tofu. Now, if you're thinking stinky tofu sounds gross, you aren't alone. But stinky tofu is a delicacy in Chinese cuisine. It's made by soaking and fermenting tofu in a brine that includes milk, eggs, vegetables, and spices. The result smells terrible, but supposedly tastes divine. Maybe that explains why the empress loved it. Elite housing and eating varied greatly depending on where and when you lived. But one thing was constant: the potential for disaster. Homes, no matter how luxurious, were vulnerable to storms, fires, pests, and people. In 1667, a fire swept through the English town of Newcastle, destroying 197 homes and displacing thousands of people. The king was quick to offer his assistance to the refugees, providing them with food, lodging, and money. But while commoners rebuilt their houses with cheap materials, the king paid for his fellow nobles to return to their former splendor. He knew that they would rebuild quickly and help bolster the economy. All across Eurasia, elites understood the importance of appearing prosperous, and the destruction of their homes was a direct assault on their authority. Sometimes disasters were man-made. In the Ottoman Empire, devastating earthquakes were a fact of life. Most famously, the 1304 Anatolian earthquake claimed over 100,000 lives and destroyed entire cities. In the aftermath, survivors struggled to find adequate shelter. Many turned to the caravanserais for refuge. These roadside inns were built to accommodate merchants traveling along major trade routes. But after the earthquake, they took in anyone who needed a place to sleep. Travelers who had planned to stay in a caravanserai for the night might find themselves sharing a room with dozens of survivors, all trying to wait out the disaster and rebuild their lives. And even when disaster wasn't looming, elite homes still demanded a lot of work. Maintaining a grand residence was a full-time job. A wealthy family might employ servants to cook and clean, a gardener to maintain their crops, and a clerk to keep track of their accounts. In some places, they could even afford to pay artisans to craft luxurious textiles or tapestries to decorate their walls. But in others, members of the elite were expected to spin their own thread. Imagine, if you will, a royal princess plying her loom, creating exquisite cloth for the royal family. But even as she spins, she dreams of adventure. Eager to leave her needlework behind and explore the world beyond her palace walls, Ah, she thinks, as she spies a handsome prince striding towards her chamber. Maybe my dreams will come true, and I can escape this tedious task. Too bad that's not how fairy tales normally go. Because as the door bursts open and a grizzled old king enters, he demands to know why the princess hasn't finished her allotment of cloth yet. And princesses everywhere sigh and return to their looms. Life is never fair. Thanks for watching. To learn more about pre-industrial housing, check out the series. See you next time. And so we return. From the frozen sea to the firelit hall, from the edge of exile to the silence of a ship buried in soil, the Viking world was vast but not invincible. Its people were tough, but not untouched by suffering. Their lives moved in rhythms we can still sense today. The rhythm of hunger and hope, of ritual and repetition. As you drift now into rest, know that history does not sleep. It lingers quietly beneath our feet. And just like the waves against an old boat, it rocks us gently forward into memory. Good night. Welcome. ... Take a deep breath and let it go slowly. Let your muscles soften and your thoughts loosen their grip. Tonight we step quietly into the past, to a palace of mirrors and candlelight, where golden ceilings stretch endlessly above and powdered nobility glides silently across marble floors. But we do not arrive here as a guest, nor as royalty. No, tonight we enter Versailles as a servant, one of hundreds, perhaps thousands. It's unseen, uncelebrated, and constantly at work. Beyond the glimmering chandeliers and perfumed salons, there are corridors of shadow. There, our story begins. The palace glows, but for you, it is cold. That line echoes through my mind as I read these words. This is the opening line of my story about what it might have been like to be a servant at Versailles. I got the idea for this story from a book called A Palace for All Seasons by Stephanie Williams. It's a story about Marie Antoinette's childhood home, and it includes the experiences of two servants who worked there. So I've taken inspiration from their stories and used my imagination to fill in the rest. In 1783, King Louis XV of France was nearing the end of his long life. His health was failing, and his famous mistress, the Marquise de Pompadour, had recently died. When he did die 4 years later, he would be succeeded by his 5-year-old grandson, Louis XVI, and his wife, Marie Antoinette. It was a chilly autumn morning in Paris when a young woman arrived at the Palace of Versailles. She had come from a poor family in the country and had very little education. In fact, all she really knew were the basics of cleaning and cooking. Still, she was strong and quick with her hands and willing to work hard. She was hired on the spot and given the title of laundress. At first, everything overwhelmed her. The sheer size of the palace, the endless corridors and staircases, held rows upon rows of suits of armor on the walls, and the crowds of courtiers who seemed to appear out of nowhere and blocked her path. She soon learned, however, that the best way to get from one place to another was simply to keep walking. If you stopped, you were likely to get lost forever. The laundry rooms were located in a large building near the royal kitchens. While they were nothing like the modern laundry rooms we have today, they did feature some early washing machines, which helped speed up the process of cleaning the linens and other textiles used throughout the palace. These machines were powered by hand cranks and were large enough to wash several loads of laundry at once. Throughout her day, the laundress would sort through piles of dirty clothes, linens and tapestries, assessing each item and determining its needs. Some garments were too delicate for the washing machine, so she would wash them by hand, scrubbing gently and carefully to preserve their shape and color. For particularly stubborn stains, she might use a special paste made from ox gall, which was a common ingredient in laundry detergents at the time. After washing, she would dry the items on a large drying rack, then press them flat with hot irons. The entire process was not only physically demanding, but also required great care and attention to detail. A small mistake could ruin an expensive garment or valuable tapestry. During her work, the laundress would often chat with the other servants around her. They came from different parts of France and even from other countries like Italy and Germany. They talked about their families and their hopes for the future, as well as the strange and sometimes funny things they saw while working at the palace. One day, the laundress was summoned to the royal sitting room. She stood awkwardly on the plush carpet, trying to ignore the curious looks from the nobles relaxing nearby. As the king approached, she curtsied deeply. She could see that he was old, much older than she had expected. His face was wrinkled and pale, and his eyes were cloudy with age. He spoke to her in a surprisingly kind voice and asked her to help clean a small stain on one of Marie Antoinette's dresses. She took the garment and went to work. Afterwards, the king thanked her profusely and promised her a bonus for her efforts. Feeling proud, the laundress curtsied again and returned to her work. But the kindness of the king was not something the laundress experienced often. In fact, the higher on the societal rungs you climbed at Versailles, the less pleasant people tended to be. This was especially true of the royal women. Each morning, the laundress awoke before dawn and hurried to the royal family's apartments. First task was to prepare Marie Antoinette's bath. The young queen was known for her elaborate bathing rituals. She liked the water mixed with milk and scented with rose petals. The laundress would heat the milk and then add the rose petals, stirring slowly so as not to make any splashes. Once the bath was ready, she would help undress the young queen and lead her to the tub. She would scrub Marie Antoinette's skin with a rough sponge, removing any dirt or dead skin. Then she would wash the queen's hair with a special herbal shampoo. Finally, she would dry Marie Antoinette with a pile of soft towels and help her put on her robe. Throughout the day, the laundress would run errands for the queen, delivering messages, fetching objects, and making small repairs. Sometimes she was called upon to help dress Marie Antoinette for official events. She would hold up the queen's skirts while her ladies-in-waiting struggled to fit the queen into her elaborate gowns. Other times, she was responsible for cleaning and pressing the queen's clothing. She would mend tears, remove stains, and iron out wrinkles, all while trying not to breathe too heavily and soil the expensive fabric. As the sun set over Versailles, the laundress's work was far from over. Each evening, she was responsible for cleaning the royal dining room. She would scrub the tables, chairs, and fireplace until they gleamed like new. She would polish the silver until it shone brightly and remove any leftover food scraps, making sure no crumbs or plates were left behind. The king and queen rarely dined in the palace. Instead, most of the meals were eaten by the nobles who crowded the dining room each night. They ate heartily and often made a mess, leaving the laundress with hours of extra work each evening. Despite the endless tasks and the constant pressure to perform perfectly, the laundress found ways to bring beauty into her life at Versailles. She loved the gardens, especially the rose garden near the palace. She would take breaks to walk among the bushes, breathing in the sweet scent of the flowers. She would pick a few petals and weave them into her hair, feeling a sense of peace in the midst of the chaos. She also found beauty in the art and architecture of the palace. She marveled at the paintings, the sculptures, and the fountains. She would sneak into the royal chapel when no one was looking and stand in awe of the golden altar and the stained glass windows. She listened to the courtiers and nobles whispering prayers, and she felt a sense of connection to something larger than herself. Despite the exhausting hours and the harsh words of the nobility, the laundress found a sense of pride in her work. She knew that she was responsible for keeping the royal court looking their best, and she took that responsibility seriously. She also developed a sense of camaraderie with the other servants. They shared stories, laughter, and complaints, and they helped each other through the tough days. Still, the laundress dreamed of a different life, a life where she didn't have to wake up before the sun, where she didn't have to listen to the demands of the nobility, and where she could have a moment of peace in the rose garden without being watched. One day, her dream came true. She was able to save enough money to buy her freedom and move to a small village outside of Paris. There she lived a simple life, working as a seamstress and raising a family. She never forgot her time at Versailles, though, and she often told stories of the palace and the people she had served. And so the story of the laundress ends, but the story of Versailles continues. The palace, with its endless corridors and staircases, its rows upon rows of suits of armor, its chattering courtiers, and its cruel mistreatment of those who dared to serve within its walls, continues to capture our imaginations, and the lives of those who lived and worked there, including the laundress, remind us of the human stories behind the glitz and glamour of royalty. And remember, the palace may glow, but for many of those who lived and worked there, it was cold. Thank you for watching. Did you know that Marie Antoinette's hair was once cut off and sold by the pound? Today we are exploring what happened to Marie Antoinette's hair after her execution. Let us step away now from the corridors of labor and rise into the royal apartments. Marie Antoinette arrived in France at just 14. an Austrian archduchess, a gift of peace, a symbol of alliance. Her new home was the Palace of Versailles. Built by King Louis XIV over 100 years before, it had become one of the largest and most sumptuous palaces in all of Europe. Its many apartments were used not just to house the king and his court, but to display their power. Vast, ceremonial, and full of watchful eyes. It was a world away from the Austrian countryside where she had grown up. At first, she was shy, then fashionable, then extravagant. The young queen began to flourish, but not everyone saw this as a good thing. Some thought her style too revealing, as others felt she was spending too much money. Still others did not like her Austrian accent or her manner. This is because when Marie Antoinette arrived at the Palace of Versailles, she brought with her a whole retinue of servants. Ladies-in-waiting, governesses, companions, and personal staff who all spoke French with varying degrees of success. Unfortunately for her, her native tongue was a sticking point. Despite taking lessons and trying hard, she never quite mastered French, which led to misunderstandings and sometimes embarrassment. And so it was easy to imagine that she was aloof and haughty. Portraits show her in gowns shaped like clouds, towering hairstyles adorned with ships and feathers. Beneath the powdered face was a woman increasingly isolated. By 1787, she was heavily pregnant with her 8th child and desperate for a son to secure the line of succession. That year, she wrote to an old friend back in Vienna, "I have a presentiment that this will be a boy. If God grants me my wish, I shall give the child the name of Louis, after His Majesty and the Dauphin, so that you may remember that the first word I uttered after having learned that I was to be a mother again was your name." But miscarriages continued to dog her. First a stillbirth, then another miscarriage. And in the summer of 1789, her obstetrician told her there was no hope of her bearing children in future. Discouraged, but resolute, she tried to put the disappointment behind her. Then the Bastille fell. Rumors reached her chambers of angry crowds gathering outside the palace, demanding the royal family leave Versailles. Louis XVI declared he would never abandon his throne, though some courtiers urged him to flee. Marie Antoinette was afraid. For her, the fall of the Bastille was a bad omen, a sign that the people were turning against the monarchy. The revolutionaries wanted to abolish the feudal system and its privileges. They were tired of the extravagance and perceived injustice of the court and the monarchy. It was no longer enough to be fashionable, popular, or even loved by the people. You had to be their equal. In the space of a few months, the royal family went from living in luxury to surviving on rations. As the nobles fled France, the king and queen stayed behind, prisoners in their own palace watched over by armed guards. Once the royal family left Versailles, it was looted by the revolutionaries. Some treasures ended up with private collectors. Others were sold abroad. Much of what was left behind was destroyed. Furniture was smashed, tapestries were torn down, and bedding ripped apart. Marie Antoinette's bedroom was defaced and ransacked. Her fine clothes were thrown into the streets. Then soldiers came to clear out the palace. They carted away what they could, leaving the rest to rot. Many items ended up in the hands of dealers and smugglers. Others were lost forever. The revolutionary fervor showed no signs of abating. Marie Antoinette and her family were paraded through the streets of Paris to the Tuileries Palace. It was cold and wet. Crowds were huge. The family huddled together for warmth, the Dauphins holding on to the queen's skirts. Their captors jeered and shouted abuse. People accused Marie Antoinette of squandering the kingdom's money. She had given lavish parties, worn expensive clothes, and enjoyed hunting trips. Now, however, those luxuries were being denied her. Prisoners in the Tuileries had to sleep on straw mattresses and eat watery soup. The king's valet recalled how the queen washed the children's clothes. While Xantep watched the royal family from afar, she was fascinated by the Dauphine's bravery. She appeared very calm, very serene, the valet said. She knew that she had done nothing to merit such treatment and bore it with resignation. But it was hard for her to hide her feelings. The queen was deeply affected by the journey. When they finally reached their destination, the Tuileries Palace, she sank to a chair, overwhelmed by exhaustion. Xantep noticed the damp stains on the children's clothing and realized that despite her elegant appearance, Marie Antoinette was struggling to look after her children. She felt sorry for her and wished she could help. But there was little any servant could do in such a volatile situation. Xantep's life at the palace revolved around cooking and cleaning. Now she spent her days scrubbing floors and making fires, and her nights listening to the screams of people being arrested outside. She knew that sooner or later it would be the royal family's turn to leave the Tuileries. She hoped they would go somewhere safe, but she wasn't sure where that might be. The people grew restless. They saw bread shortages, rising taxes, and the glittering banquets through palace gates. Marie Antoinette became a symbol, not of royalty, but of excess, of everything that seemed wrong with France. So in June 1792, while her husband went to meet the Austrians, with whom he hoped to form an alliance, she was taken to the Temple prison, a former Dominican monastery. Here, in dim oil lamplighting, dimly lit cells, the family faced their bleak future. Days turned into weeks. Time passed slowly. The Dauphins played in the courtyard while their parents waited anxiously for news. Marie Antoinette dreamed of escape, of running away from Paris and starting a new life somewhere far away. One night she confided in her lady-in-waiting. "If only someone would come and rescue us," she sighed. "Oh, if only my father would come with an army and take us away." But there was no escape. Her father and brother were at war with France. No one was coming to save her. Revolution took hold, and the palace emptied. Marie Antoinette was moved from gilded bedchambers to prison walls. The whispers of silk became chains. On October 16, 1793, she rode in a cart through Paris, her hair shorn, her dress plain. The crowd jeered. She said nothing. When her hair was cut off, it was likely done by a barber at the Place de la Concorde. The next day, she was transferred to the Conciergerie, where she awaited her trial. 4 days later, she was tried and found guilty of treason. She was sentenced to death. Early the following morning, she was awakened by the sound of drums. It was a cold, rainy day. Marie Antoinette dressed quickly. She knew what awaited her. She walked calmly towards the guillotine, where her head was chopped off and placed in a velvet bag. It is rumored that a member of the crowd reached in and grabbed a lock of her hair to keep as a souvenir. Another version states that Marie Antoinette's hairdresser cut off her hair to prevent that from happening. Either way, strands of her hair survived and were sold by the pound. To this day, locks of her hair can be found in antique shops and museums. Throughout history, people have cut off pieces of famous people's hair and clothing and saved them as souvenirs. But why? Why are we fascinated with these relics? What do they represent? Perhaps it is morbid curiosity. Perhaps it is a desire to be close to someone famous, even in death. Whatever the reason, Marie Antoinette's hair is a reminder of a troubled past. It is a symbol of the French Revolution and the excesses of the Ancien regime. It is also a reminder of the power of the people and the dangers of living in a gilded cage. Thank you for watching. Marie Antoinette was born an Austrian archduchess and soon became the most famous woman in the world when at age 14 she married the future king Louis XVI of France. Her life was one of privilege, luxury and splendor until the French Revolution turned everything upside down and her head literally rolled off her shoulders. In this series, we've looked at the ways she might have been a better queen than history remembers her. But today, let us slip into a quieter scandal, one that tarnished her reputation and remains a fascinating historical what-if. How does a necklace end up causing a revolution? It began, strangely enough, with a necklace. A stunning piece of craftsmanship, 600 diamonds woven into garlands and tassels. Originally commissioned by Madame du Barry, the former king's mistress, she fell from favor, however, and the necklace remained unsold. Imagine, if you will, a desperate woman, clever and ambitious, but without social standing, a woman named Jeanne de Lamotte, whose family has fallen on hard times. She has 2 children to feed and needs money desperately. If only there were some way to acquire a massive fortune. Perhaps by selling a beautiful diamond necklace, like the one the ex-mistress of France has been trying to unload. Jeanne's plan required 3 players. First, herself. Second, Cardinal de Rohan, the influential cardinal who still held sway over the new young queen, Marie Antoinette. And third, the queen. Perfect. Now, to make it work, she would have to convince the cardinal that Marie Antoinette wanted to purchase the necklace. That was the first hurdle, but how to get the queen's attention? The answer came unexpectedly. In a chance encounter, possibly contrived, Jean met the queen's elderly maid, an important figure since she was one of the few people Marie trusted completely. After winning the old woman over, Jean made her entrance into the royal court, first catching the eye of the queen's husband, the king. Then, after many attempts, she finally got a brief audience with the queen, an encounter lasting only a few seconds, during which Jean managed to pass a note to the queen, suggesting that she come visit Madame de Lameth at her home to see a very special necklace. The queen agreed, setting up a secret tryst for 10 o'clock at night. The scene was set. The necklace laid out on a velvet cushion, the cardinal waiting in a nearby room. Everything was ready for the sale of the century. At the appointed hour, a coach arrived carrying 4 women. The eldest, claiming to be Marie Antoinette, excused herself and entered the room alone. The cardinal gasped. Could it really be the queen? But before either could speak, she excused herself again and left just as quickly as she had come. That was the second hurdle overcome. The queen had been seen. Over the next few weeks, secret meetings were held and forged letters passed between the cardinal and the supposed queen, discussing the price of the necklace. Finally, the cardinal, eager to please his royal charge, bought the necklace, believing he was doing the queen a great favor. The truth was, he was being duped. When the forger, Jean, showed the queen the cardinal's receipt for the necklace, Marie Antoinette realized she had been set up. While shocked and furious, she also knew she had to act carefully. The cardinal had not paid for the necklace with his own money, but with funds provided by a wealthy noblewoman who was hoping to marry off her daughter to the king. To undo the deal would be to offend this potential ally. Also, the cardinal, a longtime friend of the family, was now deeply in debt, having taken a loan on the understanding that he would recoup his expenses with the resale of the necklace. If the deception was revealed, he would likely suffer a financial ruin. On the other hand, letting the deception stand would mean that the cardinal, who was known for his anti-Austrian sentiments, would gain a massive propaganda coup. He would be able to claim that he had saved the French crown hundreds of thousands of livres by refusing to participate in the Austrian Queen's vanity project. While Marie Antoinette needed allies in the French court, she also needed to protect her friends. But no matter what she decided, she would lose. So she did the only thing she could do. She called the cardinal to the palace and told him the necklace was not hers. And so the scam was revealed. Hurriedly, the queen's name was cleared of any wrongdoing, but the damage was done. The story circulated throughout Paris and beyond, making headlines and leading the public to believe that the extravagant queen had tried to buy the necklace in secret, even going so far as to don a disguise to collect it. There was only one problem. She hadn't. A year later, Jean de Lamotte went on trial for her crimes, providing testimony against her accomplices. But in the end, they all avoided serious punishment. The cardinal, while disgraced, continued to live comfortably, spending his remaining days writing memoirs. The queen's reputation, however, was not so easily repaired. As it happened, this episode was only one in a series of unfortunate events that damaged her public image. From the infamous diamond necklace affair to the lesser-known but equally damaging affair of the stolen letter. To see the full story, check out our series on why Marie Antoinette was right. For example, in the middle of the diamond necklace trial, another bombshell exploded. Letters containing slanderous rumors about the queen's virtue and fidelity were anonymously distributed around the city of Paris. The timing could not have been worse. Marie Antoinette was already smarting from the revelations of the diamond necklace affair. The new scandal struck at the core of her dignity and was harder to shake off. Adding insult to injury, the forger, Jean de Lamotte, claimed in court that she had merely acted on the queen's orders, implying that the queen had conceived the plot and was more involved than she was letting on. Faced with the onslaught, the queen's lawyers worked to uncover the source of the slanderous letters. Their search led them to one of the queen's ladies-in-waiting, an envious, embittered woman who blamed the queen for her own demotion. The scandal appeared to be over. The lady-in-waiting, exposed and discredited. Then the shocking twist. The queen's husband, King Louis XVI, was revealed as the author of the letters. Confused, let me explain. It seems that years ago, long before the scandals and rumors began swirling around Marie Antoinette, the king had written the letters in confidence to his counselor, the Marquis de Vaudreuil, seeking advice about his troubled marriage. Among other things, he complained that his wife was cold and distant, accusing her of infidelity. These complaints were not true. However, like most marriages, the relationship between Louis and Marie Antoinette was complicated. They had loved each other very much when they first met, but their feelings grew distant once they were wed. Louis found his wife immature and frivolous, often scolding her for squandering money on clothes and jewelry. Marie Antoinette, in turn, found her husband repressed and humorless, resenting his frequent criticisms. By the time they had 2 children and were living separately, Louis in his bachelor quarters and Marie Antoinette in the luxurious apartment given to her by her mother, the Austrian empress, the relationship had cooled considerably. Even so, Marie Antoinette never considered leaving Louis. She loved the idea of being queen and had no intention of giving that up. Besides, she knew the scandal that would engulf the royal family. If a divorce were ever to be discussed, thus the king's confidential letters stayed confidential, locked away in a safe until fate intervened. You see, the king's counselor, the Marquis de Vogel, died suddenly. Shortly thereafter, his widow, who had always disliked the queen, used the letters as leverage, threatening to publish them unless the queen intervened in a minor dispute she was having with a member of the royal court. The queen refused, thinking the letters would cause a scandal, and so the widow published them anyway. Imagine, if you will, being publicly slandered, accused of infidelity by your own husband. Public opinion turned sharply against the queen, who was already under scrutiny because of her lavish spending and suspected pro-Austrian sympathies. The king was forced to issue a public denial of the accusations, but the damage was done. And so, we are left with this, a series of interlocking scandals that together dealt a death blow to the queen's reputation. The story of the diamond necklace, the slanderous letters, the shameful admission of the king's infidelities, a true what-if moment in history. What if the forger had been brought to justice? What if the anonymous letters never reached the public? Or if the king had shown more support for his beleaguered wife? Together, these 3 scandals would cost the queen her dignity, her influence, and ultimately her head. As isolated incidents, they might have been contained, but as a series of misfortunes, they proved too much to bear. One more stone in the avalanche that became the French Revolution, a necklace never worn, a lie believed, a queen undone. What do you think? Should Marie Antoinette have fought back against her detractors? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. The sun climbs higher in the sky, but it does little to penetrate the thick curtains that block out the daylight in this room. Here, slumber conquers all. Men and women of the nobility snooze late into the day, unbothered by the world outside. When they awake, ladies will be dressed by their maids in the latest fashions, while the men shave off the remnants of their luxurious beards, carefully plucking out any stray hairs. But as the morning progresses, the frivolity increases. They dress not only in fine clothes, but in fine attitudes. Because today is a day like any other for these noble Europeans in the late 18th century. It's time for gossip, intrigue, and backstabbing in the salon. Soon the king himself will join them, making his entrance with great fanfare, and taking his place upon a gilded throne at the center of it all. Welcome to the series and to this episode on the lives of Europe's elite in the late 18th century. Now, before sleep overtakes us, let us look briefly at those who ruled from velvet chairs. A typical day might begin at noon. A lady of the court rises slowly. Her maid dresses her in layers of lace and silk. Perfume masks the absence of water bathing is infrequent. She walks through mirrored halls, past marble statues, and gilded doors. There is a salon in the afternoon, with conversations about philosophy, fashion, and occasionally politics. Meals are vast. Multiple courses, silver cutlery, crystal goblets, but the appetite is often more for attention than food. A nobleman's day may include hunting, dueling, or watching opera. His clothes are embroidered, his gestures rehearsed, yet beneath the powder and privilege lies fear. The economy weakens. Peasants riot, rumors spread. Some know the end is near. Others choose not to see. As night falls, music floats from open windows, laughter rises. But it is brittle. The aristocracy continues its dance just steps from the edge. While it may seem strange to us now, life in the 18th century was built around a strict routine. Most people were asleep by 8 p.m., including the American founding fathers. No matter how much we might wish to believe otherwise, even royalty had to stick to a schedule. For example, the king would rise early and spend his morning hours reading reports from his ministers and planning his day. This was also when he would meet with ambassadors from other courts or receive important visitors. The king would then wash himself in preparation for a day of work. Unlike the peasants, the king could afford scented oils and fresh linens, though he likely wouldn't use them. Louis XV of France, known for his many mistresses, preferred to bathe only twice a year, according to one chronicler. He did, however, make sure to change his linen frequently, reportedly going through 5 sets per week. After dressing in a finely tailored suit, the king would have breakfast and prepare for the day. Louis XIV famously liked to hunt, but hunting wasn't just a hobby for him. It was a way to maintain physical fitness for his role as the Sun King. Every day, Louis rose before dawn to ride, fence, or dance before breakfast so that he could keep up his strength. The famous ballet Lech Mich Imarsh was created for his amusement and featured dancing jesters dressed as hairy wild men. Once the business of ruling was set aside, leisure time would begin. The king would hold court, meeting with nobles, hoping for a favor or an audience. This was both a social event and a chance for the commoners to glimpse the majesty of the French crown jewels. The king would listen to music, watch acrobats perform, and engage in witty repartee with the members of his court. The atmosphere might seem frivolous to outsiders, but the veneer of lightheartedness concealed political barbs and strategic posturing. A compliment could mean a promotion or a transfer. A sneer could mean exile or death. As the day wore on, it would be time for more sport, perhaps a theatrical performance or a game of chess against one of the king's counselors. Gambling was popular among the nobility and often took place during the evening hours after dinner. Many kings enjoyed smoking cigars, which were particularly popular in England, where the tobacco was grown. One might think this was an odd choice for a health-conscious king, but even Louis XIV succumbed to tobacco, though he used snuff instead of smoking cigars or pipes. For many aristocrats, life in court meant never having to go hungry. However, that did not mean they ate well. Meals were huge affairs and typically consisted of multiple courses. Unfortunately, the more courses there were, the colder the main dish became. In order to stretch out the meal and show off their wealth, aristocrats would eat small bites and savor each course for as long as possible. Eating quickly would have been seen as crass and rude. You might expect that such large meals would have been filling, but you'd be wrong. Servants often stole food from the kitchens to sell on the black market, meaning that the larder was often depleted by the time dinner rolled around. A king's table would be laden with dishes of exotic meats like turkey and lobster, which had been sent as gifts from far-flung corners of his empire. These luxuries came at a cost both to the animals and to the people. Enormous amounts of food were wasted. Often entire loaves of bread were thrown away if a piece of cheese fell on the floor. Wine flowed freely, sometimes mixed with milk to avoid waste. While the king drank from golden goblets, peasants raised their tin mugs in silent supplication, hoping for a good harvest and praying for rain to end their drought. In the evenings, the king and his court would relax with some entertainment. Music was always present, whether in the form of an opera or a simple string quartet. Opera was hugely popular in Italy, and the greatest composers of the time were in demand at every royal court. Plays were also popular, though they were rarely performed for the amusement of the king. Instead, plays were used as a propaganda tool, depicting historical events or allegories based on contemporary issues. One could get in serious trouble for writing a play critical of the king, as playwright Voltaire found out when he wrote a play criticizing the French clergy. The production was banned and Voltaire was exiled from the court. Dancing was another popular pastime, and many courtiers made a show of their fancy footwork. Kings loved to parade around their beautiful daughters, and a princess's marriage was a strategic opportunity to form alliances. The most eligible princesses were always surrounded by suitors, and a grand ball was a perfect place to find a husband. But not everyone wanted to marry, and young ladies would often resist their father's wishes. The best tactic for avoiding a forced marriage was to run away, which happened more often than one might expect. Nobility often viewed marriage as a financial transaction, but love matches were not unheard of. In fact, the French king had many of them. producing several legitimate children out of wedlock. One might think that a king's mistress would live a cushy life, but that was not necessarily the case. Mistresses were expensive and had to be paid handsomely in order to stay in the king's good graces. If she gave birth to a legitimized child, she could expect to receive a title and a pension, as well as a nice house, and enough money to maintain a respectable lifestyle. But if she failed to produce a male heir, she might be replaced and left with nothing. In order to maintain the appearance of piety, kings often married young women from prominent noble families. But these marriages were often unhappy. Women were expected to be subservient to their husbands and produce heirs as quickly as possible. Once the children were born, the mother's role was complete, and she might be relegated to a secondary bedroom. Infidelity was common, and many royal women took lovers in order to gain power or simply for companionship. But not all was well in the kingdom. While the aristocrats feasted and danced, rumblings of discontent grew louder. Rumors spread of an American rebellion and of a French Revolution. Kings lost their heads. Queens fled the country. The aristocracy crumbled, and with it, the foundations of society began to shake. For some time, the pace of aristocratic life seems almost incomprehensible. With so much emphasis on ceremony and etiquette, it can be hard to imagine that these people were capable of anything more than pleasantries and polite conversation. Yet behind the powdered wigs and embroidered waistcoats, their minds were sharp and their wills were strong. The aristocracy fought hard to maintain its privileged position in society, but in the face of growing unrest and changing times, it was not enough. The guillotine waited in the wings, and soon the music would stop. If you enjoy learning about history through stories, then you will love our podcast. Each week, we bring you new episodes on a range of fascinating topics, from ancient Egypt to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Our award-winning stories have been heard by millions of listeners, and we're always creating new ways to bring history to life. Give it a listen and subscribe. And so we return. From the servant's dark corner to the queen's final walk. From stolen diamonds to fading salons, Versailles, for all its beauty, was a place of fragile grandeur. Its walls held secrets and silks, quiet resentment, and polished shoes. A world divided not by distance, but by floors. As you drift now into sleep, imagine the palace quiet again. Curtains drawn, candles flickering low, footsteps fading. The rhythm of lives lived under marble and shadow. Good night. Welcome. Tonight, let us leave behind the rhythms of the modern world, the buzz of devices, the flicker of electric lights, and step into a quieter, distant time. Imagine a place where the world moved more slowly, where the walls were made of stone, and lives were bound by faith, disease, and ritual. In this journey, we'll walk softly through centuries past, exploring the hushed, isolated lives of those who lived on the edge, not only of towns, but of society itself. We begin in a place few dared to visit, the medieval leper colony. Then we'll follow a man who chose that exile willingly, St. Francis of Assisi. We'll pause at a strange grave of nights and disease. And finally, we'll end our journey in the stony silence of a medieval monastery, where lives were guided by bells, books, and hidden ambitions. So, find a comfortable place, let your breathing slow, let history gently unfold. The year is 1223. A chill wind blows across the North Sea, whipping the waves into a frenzy and sending spray over the bows of two ships struggling against the current. On the deck of one of them stands a young man with dark hair and eyes the color of the sea itself. His face is handsome, though etched with lines of tension and worry that belie his years. This is Arnold, a former resident of the coastal village of Little Bardney, and he's returning after an absence of more than a year, fearful of what he will find. The truth is, Arnold has good reason to be afraid. For when he sailed away from Little Bradney last year, he was a healthy young man. And now when he returns, he suffers from the dreaded disease of leprosy. Leprosy, or Hansen's disease, is a chronic infectious disease caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium leprae. It typically affects the skin, peripheral nerves, upper respiratory tract, and eyes. Leprosy is spread by armadillos, 9-banded armadillos in particular, which serve as a reservoir for the bacteria. Humans can contract the disease by handling infected animals or inhaling droplets from an infected person's cough, Leprosy is not highly contagious and is curable with a multi-drug regimen if caught early enough. But left untreated, it can cause severe physical disfigurement, disability, and even death. Symptoms may develop slowly over years or even decades. And in medieval Europe, where knowledge of germs and bacteria was limited, leprosy was not only incurable, it was also merciless. As Arnold approaches his hometown, he wears a simple brown robe and a hood that conceals his face. In the Middle Ages, those afflicted with leprosy were often shunned and ostracized by society, as they should have been. They were forced to live in isolation, cut off from their families and communities, and were frequently branded as outcasts or even cursed by God himself. Leprosy was known as the poor man's disease because it most commonly affected the impoverished, which in medieval Europe meant almost everyone. For centuries, people with leprosy were subjected to horrific treatment. They were ridiculed, harassed, and murdered. In some cases, they were burned at the stake, accused of being heretics or witches. This persecution was based on the belief that leprosy was a sin or a punishment for some wrongdoing. In fact, leprosy could strike anyone. Didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, young or old, male or female, no one was safe. The disease knew no social boundaries. Kings and paupers alike could fall victim to its relentless advance. Upon reaching the shore, Arno makes his way to a clearing outside the village, clutching a letter from the local lord granting him access to the town and the right to receive medical attention. As he approaches, he hears children shouting and pointing at him, calling him a monster and a leper. He can feel their eyes boring into him. Then, just as he feared, a group of men steps forward to block his path, demanding to know who he is and where he's come from. When Arnell tells them he's from Little Bordini, they ask why he returned, since he's a sick man with a horrible disease that should be kept far away from the rest of them. Arnell says he's come to see his father, who's fallen ill and needs his help. He asks the men to let him pass, saying he won't stay long. But the villagers refuse. They tell him he must leave and never return. They warn him that if he stays in the village, he'll be in grave danger. With tears in his eyes, Arnold tells the men he won't go until he's spoken to his father, but they're having none of it. And one of the men strikes him across the face with an iron-tipped staff. Arnold falls to his knees, stunned and bleeding. The men gather around him, taunting him and threatening to kill him unless he leaves immediately. Arnold knows he can't fight them all, so he does the only thing he can. He stands up slowly and walks away, leaving the village and his father behind. Arnold turns and runs, falling to his knees in exhaustion and despair, realizing he'll never be accepted back into his home. Arnold looks down at his hands and sees that the skin is changing colors. His fingers are growing thicker, shorter, and more rigid. He feels weakness in his arms and legs. His feet are numb. He realizes his whole body is filled with pain. He tries to make sense of these feelings, but can't. All he knows is that he feels terrible. He's tried everything to get rid of the symptoms, but nothing has worked. He's taken baths with vinegar, salt, and herbs, but it hasn't helped. He's covered himself with animal fat and dung, but that didn't work either. He's worn special gloves and belts to move his fingers and keep them flexible, but it hasn't stopped them from curling and stiffening. Arnold lives in a small room near the leprosarium, and he spends most of his days in bed or sitting quietly by the window, watching the world go by. He doesn't talk much, and when he does, his voice is weak and shaky. He eats little, and most of the food he's given goes to waste. He prefers to spend his time thinking about the past, about the days before he got sick. He thinks about the friends he used to play with, the games they used to play, and the places they used to go. He remembers how much fun he used to have. He also remembers the girl he loved, Ellen, with her flowing golden hair and sparkling blue eyes. He remembers how she used to laugh and how they used to dance together at the village festivals. Arnold misses Ellen terribly. He wonders if she still thinks about him, if she remembers the promises they made to each other, wonders if she knows he's back in town, and if so, what she's doing about it. Most of all, he wishes he could see her again, just one last time, to tell her goodbye. But he knows he can't. He's too ashamed, too afraid. When Arnold was diagnosed with leprosy, he was devastated. He didn't want to believe it. He thought he was strong, healthy, and wouldn't succumb to the disease. But he was wrong. Now he's paying the price, living in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, away from everyone he ever loved. He's cut off from his family and friends, and he's lost the girl he loves. He's alone and he's scared. After spending many months at the leprosarium, Arnold's health begins to improve somewhat, and the priest suggests he might be able to return to his village and resume a normal life. However, the villagers reject him, and he's forced to stay at the leprosarium permanently. As time passes, Arnold grows older and weaker. He spends his days praying and talking to God, asking for forgiveness and mercy. He knows he's not perfect and he's done many things wrong in his life. He hopes God will forgive him and allow him to enter heaven when he dies. But he's not sure if God will accept him. He's not sure if he deserves it. One day, while sitting by the window, Arnold sees a group of children playing outside the leprosarium. He watches them run and laugh and play, and he remembers when he was a child and used to do the same things. He feels a surge of happiness and joy, and for a moment, he forgets about his illness and the pain he's in. But then he sees the children stop playing and point at him, and he remembers he's not like them. He's different. He's a leper. He feels sad and lonely again, and he wishes he could join the children, but he knows he can't. He's too sick, too disfigured. They'd be afraid of him.
Yes.
As the years go by, Arnold becomes more and more withdrawn. He spends most of his time in bed, too weak to get up. He's lost all hope of ever leaving the leprosarium, and he's given up on life. One day while lying in bed, Arnold hears a knock at the door. He doesn't bother to answer. He knows it's just another visitor come to gawk at the leper. But then the door opens, and a familiar voice calls out, "Arnold, it's me, Ellen." Arnold sits up in bed and looks toward the door. Can it be? Could Ellen really be here after all this time? What does she want? Had she come to say goodbye? Or is there more to her visit? Perhaps she's come to help him escape the leprosarium. Arnold can't believe it, but he's too weak to get up and see for himself. Now, would you help Arnold escape the leprosarium, or do you think he should remain there? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Now let us walk toward another figure, not a sufferer, but a seeker. Francis of Assisi, born Giovanni, was the son of a wealthy cloth merchant in the late 12th century. His youth was filled with silk, laughter, and feasts. He was well-liked, charismatic, and fond of poetry. But life, as it often does, changed direction. A war between Assisi and Perugia drew him to battle. He was captured, imprisoned, and returned home sick and shaken. Something in him shifted. The gaiety of his youth felt empty. He began to spend time in abandoned churches, listening to silence. One day he kissed a leper, not out of pity, but something deeper. A strange, defiant love. His father disapproved. Francis renounced his inheritance publicly. Stripping off his clothes in front of the bishop, he handed back his father's fine garments and stood naked. He clothed himself in rags and chose a new life, one of wandering, poverty, and service. He lived among lepers by choice. He tended to their sores, spoke gently to those no one else dared touch. He believed they were not cursed but blessed. Reflections of Christ's suffering, his followers grew. They took no possessions, slept on the ground, ate what was given. But this was no easy path. The church regarded them with suspicion. The hierarchy liked order, not barefoot preachers quoting scripture. Francis was summoned, questioned, yet he remained calm, always calm, never bitter, only firm. As years passed, his health declined. His body bent, his eyes dimmed. Legend says he received stigmata, marks of Christ's wounds, but spoke little of them. He wrote poems to the sun, to animals, to death itself. He died not in grandeur, but on the bare earth, wrapped in humility. And even now, centuries later, his name echoes softly through hospitals and homes for the poor. A man who found peace not by fleeing suffering, but by walking straight into its heart. Now, though born into privilege, Francis's story doesn't fit the usual narrative of riches corrupting the pure. He wasn't a saint who shunned the world, enjoyed its pleasures initially. But his transformation wasn't some mystical, inexplicable event. It was a conscious choice after a life-altering experience. Captivity stripped him of worldly comforts and the carefree abandon of youth. This isn't unique to Francis. Many have stories of sudden shifts after a dramatic event, a near-death experience, a profound loss, or a moment of deep connection. These moments, like cracks in an egg, open us up to new possibilities, sometimes leading to drastic changes. Yet change is rarely easy, especially when it goes against societal norms. Francis' decision to embrace poverty was radical. It challenged the very fabric of his upbringing, the expectations of his family, the standards of his time. But he didn't just reject poverty. He chose to identify with it, to live it, to understand it intimately. He didn't stand aloof and preach. He walked among the lepers, in the dirt, under the sun, sharing their condition, not out of pity, but out of solidarity. This wasn't about escapism. It was about confronting life directly, embracing its full spectrum, including what many would cast aside as unworthy. His pursuit of peace wasn't passive either. It wasn't about seeking an absence of turmoil, but about finding a center of stillness within him, a calmness that anchored him through life's storms. This inner peace wasn't a static state, but an active energy that guided his interactions with the world. It allowed him to face authority without bitterness, to engage with difference without fear, and to connect with all of creation, not just fellow humans, but birds and beasts as well. Francis's life challenges several assumptions we might casually make. It challenges the idea that spiritual seekers are naive dreamers, detached from the world. He was engaged with life, wrestling with its complexities, embracing its joys and sorrows, its beauty and its pain. It also challenges the notion that comfort and spirituality are mutually exclusive. Francis didn't shy away from life's pleasures, but found a deeper meaning and joy in a life of simplicity and service. In a world that often tells us to look out for ourselves, to chase comfort and material success, Francis offers a different lens. He invites us to consider what truly brings us peace, to challenge the status quo, and to recognize that perhaps in giving up our attachment to material things, we might just find ourselves more fully alive. He reminds us that the path to inner peace might not be a solitary one, but can be found in our connections with others, with nature, and with a higher power. It's a path that begins with a single step, a step towards understanding, acceptance, and love. Fast forward the year 2005 to the dry, dusty soil near Jerusalem. Archaeologists are digging at the side of an ancient Christian hospital, one used during the Crusades. What they uncover is quietly astonishing. Dozens of skeletons, many buried hastily. Some show signs of leprosy, the telltale thinning of bones, the erosion of nasal cavities. But these are not ordinary patients. Among them are men buried with swords and armor fittings, and one knightly cross. Leper knights. A contradiction, yet real. They were likely members of the Order of St. Lazarus, a lesser-known military order that accepted knights afflicted with leprosy. The problem was not their devotion, but how to deploy it. For centuries, the order struggled to find a role for its unaccepted, unwanted members. At first, lepers were barred from the Crusades entirely. Too much of a liability. Then they were pressed into service, forming a kind of diseased shock troop, whose very appearance would terrify their enemies. Yet they were still considered unfit. Lepers were commonly believed to spread their disease through touch, and so these knights had to keep their distance. They couldn't even offer their swords to battle, not unless they were sure they wouldn't die of leprosy before reaching the front. So they did something else. They protected pilgrims on their way to the Holy Land, built hospitals, kept the sick, and dying comfortable, managed estates when nobles fell victim to the disease. They were even allowed to administer last rites, since the very nature of their calling prevented them from handling a healthy body. There was little more they could do. As the Crusader states grew in power and stability, the leprosy problem eased. Lepers were gradually phased out of military service, living instead among the ranks as outcasts, unwanted but necessary. These holy lepers were buried at the site of their hospital near Jerusalem, but this place also held secrets. Mass graves, some holding up to 20 bodies, hinting at rapid deaths. Were they killed in battle? Did a siege ravage the town? Or did an epidemic sweep through the region, taking the knights as well as the patients? Their bones tell stories, but not all their names are known, and so we are left with questions. What did it mean to fight for faith while slowly disintegrating? To wear armor that rubbed against raw skin, to pray for salvation while bearing society's deepest fear? These were warriors who chose their calling despite the cost, men who didn't flee from battle but charged into it. When medieval chroniclers described the impact of the Crusader armies, they commonly noted the terror. Inspired by a band of holy lepers let loose on the enemy. Their emaciated forms and foul visages, striking fear into the hearts of even the most stalwart defenders. But what was it like to be one of those lepers? We can only imagine what thoughts raced through their minds as they rode toward battle. What prayers they muttered under their breath as they locked their armor or raised their shields. But in the quiet earth, they now rest. Warriors and outcasts, brothers bound by plague and purpose, they may have been unwanted, feared, and alone. Yet they found each other and forged a bond that defied medieval taboos, a brotherhood forged in faith, leprosy, and war. From the crusader states of the Levant, the Holy Land, they were a force unlike any other, a testament to the strange and varied nature of medieval warfare. But their story has largely been forgotten, till now. Thank you for watching. This is a story about silence. Let us step now into a different kind of silence, deeper, colder. The cloisters of a medieval monastery. It is before dawn. A bell tolls, low and echoing. You rise from your wooden bed. No pillow, no fire. You dress in wool robes, still damp from the night. In single file, you join the others, moving slowly toward the chapel. No words are spoken. The chant begins. Low, rhythmic, steady, Latin verses. You do not understand every word, but that's not the point. The ritual is the meaning. Your day is divided by bells, hours marked not by tasks, but by prayer. Between them, you copy texts, tend gardens, sweep halls. Meals are eaten in silence. A monk reads scripture while others eat. Bread, cheese, beans, meat only on rare days. Rules govern everything. The rule of St. Benedict lays out when to speak, how to sleep, what to wear. Obedience is not optional. It is salvation. Infractions are punished by silence, fasting, or expulsion. Yet beneath this peace lies something more complicated. Politics. Some abbots wield power, not just over monks, but over villages, trade, even kings. Manuscripts are edited, ideas debated. Some books are banned, others locked away. And then there are secrets. Confessions whispered through wooden screens, illicit letters, hidden doubts. Not every monk is holy. Not every vow is kept. Still, the rhythm endures. Bells ring. Candles flicker. The same prayers, the same steps, the same stone underfoot. A world apart, bound by devotion, repetition, and quiet ambition. Thank you for watching. This has been a story about silence brought to you by a digital studio. We produce the highest quality, historically accurate, and interactive stories about the past. Our app is available on all major app stores. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us. We'd love bringing these mini history lessons to everyone for free. But we do hope that you will consider supporting us. With your support, we can keep making amazing historical tales like this one. Thanks for watching. So now, we return. We have walked through the wind-blown ruins of a leper colony. We have traced the barefoot steps of a saint. We've uncovered silent warriors beneath the earth. And we have sat quietly in the candlelight of a monastery. All of them in different ways, lived at the edges. Of health, of society, of belief, of power. Their worlds were limited, yet full, filled with rituals, suffering, kindness, and contradictions. As you drift now into sleep, remember, history is not just the loud battles or golden thrones. It's the worn paths between crumbling walls, the quiet resilience of those cast aside, prayers said in the dark. And in those gentle echoes, we find a strange kind of peace. Sleep well.